this group of disciples, they wanted Jesus as a political king, and that might seem very righteous to us. I mean, right? Like Jesus for president. This is good. They wanted Jesus to be king and ruler, and he was going to defeat the pagan Romans. They have all this evil corruption going on. They worship false gods. One of the emperors was a homosexual. We want them out, Jesus. Take care of our enemies. And yet, this chapter tells us that same group that wanted Jesus as king will be the same group that crucifies him. There are people today who want Jesus as a deliverer from their political enemies. But that doesn't make them a disciple. Some people today want Jesus from a deliverer, but that does not make them his disciples. A lot of talk out there about Jesus, about God, about the Bible. Politicians talk about it. Pastors talk about it. YouTubers talk about it. But that doesn't make you a follower and a disciple of Jesus. You can declare, we want Jesus to be king of these United States. Oust all these evil rebels from our land. But that doesn't guarantee you are a disciple. And it might be that not only are you not a disciple, but Jesus is withdrawing from you like he did to the crowds. Don't mishear me, Jesus is king. He has a day when he will rule and reign, and every knee will bow, and every tongue will confess that he is Lord over all. He is Lord over all. Do not mishear me. The problem is when we say we want Jesus as king, we don't actually want Jesus. We just want what he can do for us. We want him to, number one, make our lives comfortable, and number two, crush our enemies. I hear Christians pray and thank Jesus for the freedom we have in our country to worship him without persecution, which is good and a right thing to do. Our national freedom is a gift from God. But then they come to church like 10 times a year. I hear Christians, again, lament. There's no prayer in schools, but you don't even pray in church. You don't come to corporate prayer gatherings. I hear Christians talk about the importance of freedom of speech, and then you don't even evangelize. Listen, if we're not gathering to worship with our freedom of religion, if we're complaining about not having prayer in schools and you don't pray, if you're talking about we need freedom of speech and you don't evangelize and share the gospel, then what do you really want these things for? You see, a good question to ask, would I even get persecuted if those things were taken away from me? If you live in a totalitarian country, would you even be persecuted for being a Christian? Or is your Christianity so private, so not impactful, that no one would even really care if you claim the name of Christ? Listen, I'm not talking about being a masochist. We don't want to suffer. But does anyone know you're a Christian by the way you live your life? Church, if nobody in your life knows you're a Christian, you're not doing it right. You are the light of the world. You're the light of the world. Jesus says we don't hide lamps under baskets. Christian, you are the salt of the earth. And Jesus says if the salt loses its saltiness, it is worthless. The only thing it's good for is being thrown out and trampled underfoot. So sometimes when I hear this political talk about wanting Jesus as king, I wonder, do we really want Jesus in all of this? I think we're just more like these disciples than we care to admit. We want God to crush our enemies, and we want prosperity. We want the bad people to go down and the good people to go up. And it's funny, in our calculations, it's always us and our friends and our family who are the good people and everybody else who's the bad people. It's not wrong for God to make things right. It's not wrong to long for true justice and righteousness. But church, it also shows me we don't understand the gospel of grace. God loved me and sent his son to die for me while I was still a sinner. A sinner. An enemy of God. Church, you did nothing to deserve the great salvation which you have. So when I look at that protester, when I look at that looter, when I look at that ideological opponent, God, remind me how much you loved me when I was far from you. Teach me to love them like you love them.